It was late on a Friday night when I received the call. My name is Sarah, and I had been living in a small apartment on the edge of town for about 6 months. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, a place where nothing ever seemed out of place. But that night, everything was about to change. The call came from my mother, who lived an hour away in the countryside. She sounded nervous, which was unusual for her. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling, "I need you to come home. Something's wrong." "What is it, Mom?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "I'm not sure," she replied, but her words felt distant, almost unsure. "I can't explain it, but I'm scared. Please come home." Her voice lingered in my mind as I hung up the phone. I packed a bag quickly, my hands shaking as I rushed to my car. The night felt too still, the fog thickening around me as I drove, the headlights cutting through the mist like knives. I didn't know why, but a sense of dread had settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something was waiting. When I arrived at my mother's house, it was nearly midnight. The usual warm glow of the porch light was absent. I parked in the driveway, noticing the house looked unusually dark, like it hadn't been lived in for days. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the front door. It was slightly ajar. "Mom?" I called as I pushed the door open, my voice low but filled with fear. No answer. My stomach twisted as I stepped inside, the wooden floors creaking under my feet in the silence of the house. "Mom?" I called again, more urgently now. I made my way through the living room, passing by the empty armchairs and the untouched coffee table. The place was still, too still. There were no sounds of the TV playing, no rustling in the kitchen, only the quiet, empty feeling that weighed on the air. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the window, her eyes wide, staring out into the dark yard. Her back was to me, but she didn't move when I entered. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked softly, stepping closer. She turned slowly, her face pale, her expression strange. She looked at me for a moment, but it was as if she wasn't really seeing me. She blinked slowly, almost as though waking from a dream. "I didn't hear you come in," she whispered, her voice distant, empty. I don't know who it is, Sarah. They've been here every night." A shiver ran down my spine, but I swallowed my fear and stepped closer. "Who's been here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and pointed toward the hallway. I followed her finger with my eyes, but I didn't see anything. Just the same dark, quiet house. "They've been walking around," she said, her voice barely audible. "I can hear them at night. They come inside, but when I go to look, there's nothing. I think they're watching me." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to say. My mother was always strong, always in control, but tonight she seemed different. The fear in her eyes was too real to ignore. I heard it then. The soft, faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was moving through the house. I froze, my blood running cold. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, but her eyes were glazed, lost in something far away. "They've been here before, always the same time." I moved toward the hallway, my breath shallow and quick. Each step felt like an eternity. My fingers brushed the wall as I moved, the coolness of it grounding me in this nightmare. I called out again, "Mom?" But there was no answer. I reached the living room, and there, in the dim light, I saw the front door. It was open, wider than I had left it, and the steps, those slow, deliberate steps, were getting closer. I knew someone was there. Someone was waiting. I glanced back at my mom, but she was gone. "Mom?" I called, my voice cracking with fear. I rushed to the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in tighter with every step. As I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. The footsteps had stopped too. I turned toward the basement door. It was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. That door was always locked, but now it hung open, as if inviting me in. I didn't want to go down there, but the noise, the scratching sound came from the darkness below. It was faint at first, like a soft tap, then louder, more frantic. I froze, my pulse quickening as my mind raced to make sense of what was happening. I slowly pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. The basement was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel it. Something was there. The scratching stopped, replaced by a whisper. "Come down, Sarah." I stepped back, panic surging through me. The whisper was low, familiar, almost mocking. I slammed the door shut, my breath ragged as I backed away. I dialed 911, but before I could speak, I heard the whisper again, louder, closer. "You shouldn't have locked the door." I turned. There, standing in the hallway, was a figure. A man. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that seemed hollow. His face was pale, his grin too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I backed away, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his grin widening with every slow step. "I've been here all along," he said, his voice cold, void of emotion. "And I'm not leaving." Fear surged through me like a tidal wave, but I didn't wait for him to come any closer. I ran, desperate, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't look back until I was outside, the cold night air rushing to meet me. I rushed to my car, my hands shaking so much that I almost couldn't get the keys in the ignition. I drove until the house was a distant memory, but the fear stayed with me. The man, the whisper, the footsteps. It all felt too real. The police arrived soon after I called. They checked the house but found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of anyone inside. The basement was empty. There was nothing. But as I stood in the kitchen with one of the officers, I looked down at the phone. It was off the hook again. I turned to the officer, my voice low. "I didn't do that." He looked at me with a raised brow, but didn't say anything. Then my eyes caught something on the floor. Footprints. They led from the basement door across the kitchen and back toward the living room. They were old, dusty. They weren't fresh. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. As I left the house, the officer called after me. "Are you sure about this? There's no sign of anyone. Maybe you were just hearing things?" But I couldn't shake the feeling. The man, he wasn't gone. He was still there. I didn't look back as I got into my car and drove away, but I knew one thing. I would never step foot in that house again. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment, the events of the night still fresh in my mind. I tried to push it out of my thoughts, but there was one thing I couldn't forget, the whisper. "You shouldn't have locked the door." It wasn't until the afternoon that I realized it. I looked down at my phone, and there, in the call history, was a number. My mother's. The call was placed at exactly 3:12 a.m., but I hadn't called her. I live in a small, quiet town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, where the nights feel darker than they should and the air holds a weight that makes every sound seem too loud. Most of the people here are friendly, but it's the kind of place where you'd never be caught alone on the back roads after dark. It was New Year's Eve, and like every year, my friend Rob invited me to his family's party in the hills, about a 40-minute drive away. Rob's house sat atop a secluded ridge, and the only way to get there was a winding, narrow road that twisted through dense woods, all but swallowed by the dark. I knew the route well, but tonight something felt off. The drive had started like any other. My headlights sliced through the foggy air as the trees around me grew thicker, closing in on the road. I remember thinking how quiet it was, almost like the world had gone to sleep early. My phone buzzed, and it was Rob. He was reminding me not to get lost. But that didn't bother me. I knew the way. About halfway through the journey, I saw her. A figure standing just off the side of the road, barely visible against the shadows, wearing a long white dress that shimmered faintly under the headlights. I barely registered her at first, but then my eyes caught the stillness. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at something. Maybe me. I slowed down, heart pounding, but then I told myself she was probably just someone out for a walk, though I knew it didn't make much sense. It was freezing out, and who would walk on this stretch of road at this hour in a dress like that? I didn't stop. Something told me to keep moving. I passed her slowly, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. She hadn't moved, but she was watching me. No, more like following me. Her head was tilted slightly, almost like she was waiting for something. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was just spooked. After all, it's the kind of road where your mind starts to play tricks on you. But the rest of the drive felt different, heavier. I made it to Rob's place without further incident, and the party was just as wild as usual. Laughter, music, people catching up. But every now and then, I found myself looking out the window, wondering if that woman had followed me here, if she was out there in the woods, waiting. When the clock struck midnight, I tried to push it out of my mind. It was New Year's Eve, after all. But as the party wound down and people started to leave, I noticed I was one of the last to go. Rob and his family had already gone to bed, and I was just about to get in my car when my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Rob. "Hey, you're leaving already? There's a shortcut through the woods that saves time." Normally, I'd ignore a shortcut in the dark, but I was tired, and I didn't want to waste more time. I'd seen the road from the other direction before, but it was a little more secluded. Still, it seemed like a good idea. I turned onto the unmarked road, but almost immediately, something felt wrong. The air grew even colder. My headlights cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally into the trees. The further I went, the more I began to feel like something was watching me. I was about 10 minutes in when I heard a sound, a snap of a twig. It was barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. I brushed it off, blaming the cold and the wind. But then I heard it again, louder this time. I slammed on the brakes. Ahead, in the distance, there was a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was her, the woman in the white dress. Her back was to me, but as soon as I stopped, she slowly turned, as though she had been waiting for me. Her face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see her eyes, dark, almost like they were hollow. I was frozen, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, but then before I could even think about driving away, she started walking toward me. I don't know why, but I drove. I slammed the gas pedal down, ignoring the sick feeling in my stomach. The road twisted and turned in sharp, uneven curves, but I didn't dare look back. I was sure she was following me, though. I could hear something behind me, the sound of something, moving in the woods. My tire blew out. In an instant, the car jerked to a halt. The harsh screeching of metal against asphalt filled the air, and I cursed. I'd been so close. I quickly got out of the car, fumbling for my flashlight. The moment I stepped onto the dirt, the forest around me fell completely silent. Not a single rustle of leaves, not even the wind. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A whisper. Software. So soft it made my skin crawl. "I see you." I froze. My blood ran cold. It was her voice, but it wasn't right. It was distorted, twisted. I turned, shining my light into the trees. And there she was, standing just a few feet away. The white dress was filthy now, stained with dirt and something darker, but her face was gone, as if it had been scraped away, only a gaping hole where her mouth and nose should be. She reached for me. But before I could even scream, something else moved in the trees behind her. Another figure, much larger, hunched and bent. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't think. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Through the trees, through the darkness, until I stumbled back onto the main road. But when I turned, she was gone. I made it back to Rob's house, breathless, shaking and covered in sweat. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, though. I was too scared to. But the next morning, when I went to check my car, I found something strange. Deep scratches along the side of the door, like something, or someone, had tried to get in. The tire wasn't the only thing that had been damaged. I never took that shortcut again. And every New Year's Eve, when I drive back through those woods, I always check the rearview mirror because I can never shake the feeling that someone or something is always watching.